If you like this video, make sure to visit our Vimeo page and follow us to get the latest update.
All right. So in the previous session, what we did is we started talking about SLT, data provisioning. I'm not going to spend too much time doing a recap of what we did yesterday, just hopefully a minute worth of recap should be sufficient, and then we can get started with our new discussion. So if everybody remembers some of the functionalities or the use case where there's a question from Fred. I did not see that. Fred, did you have a question on the chat window? I'm probably not seeing it. If you don't mind, can you copy and paste the question again? I do not see it on the screen. Yeah, if you could go ahead and paste the question again, I will take a look at it and I'll answer it. But in the meantime, let me quickly walk through the functionalities. We saw that it was predominantly used for operational data mart. And we all understand what is that operational data mart. When you have to move data from a specific subject area into SAP HANA for reporting, we would go with operational data mart. We also understood that you can, with SLT, you can bring data from both SAP and non-SAP data sources. When we talk about non-SAP data sources, what was the only condition we had specified? Can anybody help me out? If I were to bring data from a non-SAP source system using SLT, what was the only condition we had? We had specified that it has to be a certified RDBMS, Relational Database Management System, which works with SAP system. So that was the criteria. We also mentioned that this is one specific reason why SLT is extremely popular. Can anybody tell me what is that key factor that differentiates SLT from other data provisioning technique and why people choose SLT? Perfect. Thanks, Vijayata. So real-time replication. Real-time replication is possible using SLT. That being said, if you need to do a scheduled based replication, that is also possible. And the next thing that we looked at is there are transformation capabilities with SLT. You can do both table level transformation and data level transformation. And finally, we saw that its parent technology is SAP Landscape Optimizer, and it's easy to configure. The configuration part is very easy to perform, which is it'll take the administrators about a day or so to completely set up the SLT configuration. All right, so there is a question from Fred. Who is an SAP solution architect, SAP modeler, SAP analytics program? Do we qualify to fill these roles? Absolutely. So let me answer that question. So typically what happens is, if after you finish the course, you typically would project yourself as a person with HANA experience of over 3 to 4 years of experience. That's typically the kind of experience you can show after you have completed the course. So the suggestion is, once you complete the course, predominantly you are looking for an SAP HANA consultant role. When I say consultant, you are not bound by a specific activity. You as a HANA consultant can perform data provisioning. You can do information modeling, and you can help out with reporting. So these are the typical broad categories of information that you can work on as a SAP HANA consultant. But as you work on it, let's say you give it a year or 2 years, and you get really good hands-on experience working in real-time projects, you will start drifting toward one or many of these options. If you continue to work on as a HANA consultant and you like all the 3 areas to focus on, the path that you're typically choosing is you're wanting to become a solution architect. A solution architect is a person who is going to look through the entire end-to-end of the project and come up with a design. You hear a requirement, you come up with a project requirement, you understand what the requirement is telling about, and then you take that information and you design how this solution should come up. What are the, so you will, once you understand the requirement, you will say, okay, in order for me to bring this data and make this project happen, I'm going to bring data from a SQL Server system, from an Oracle system, from an SAP system, and a couple of flat file systems. Now, looking at those options, you will now say, as an architect, you will decide what is the best and efficient data provisioning technique to use to achieve this project requirement. So you will make that decision. Then you will make a decision on how to do the information modeling. You will help the team design it. You will say, these are the things that you have to consider in making this information modeling. Because as an architect, the big difference between an architect and a developer or a consultant or a modeler is a developer or a modeler is going to focus on what is given to you right now. You are given a requirement, you try to solve it with a solution. That's the experience a consultant or a modeler is going to bring, right? An architect, why a person is referred to as an architect is he or she not only tries to solve the problem for the current requirement, but also designs it in a fashion that it can be helpful for the future. So you're also designing the system for the unknown that's going to come up for the future. So you create a design that is open-ended, such a way that tomorrow there is a change to the initial requirement, it can be easily adapted. All right. So that's the typical role of a solution architect. And that experience comes only through working through several projects. Once you have become comfortable as a SAP HANA consultant, working on these three different categories, you will start understanding that where your core focus is. You might feel that, okay, even though I do data provisioning, information modeling, and reporting, I feel that I have a strong edge on data provisioning. I'm having a keen eye where I can provide a better solution when it comes to data provisioning. Or you could find that you have good experience with data provisioning, but information modeling is where you really have passion. Then in those cases, you can then you can become a SAP modeler, HANA modeler, you can become a modeler architect, where your focus is on designing very well designed data models. And SAP Analytics is actually a platform. It's a reporting tool. So there is a platform called SAP Analytics Cloud. But in general, when you talk about SAP Analytics, you're focused more on the reporting side of things. Once the data model is created, how can I present that information? How can I make that underlying data model's information valuable for the organization? Does that help answer your question, Fred? Perfect. So Kofi has a question. Is it possible for you to share notes for revision? Absolutely. I thought I had already started that. If not, I will work on it this weekend, Kofi, and I will provide link to my OneNote, so everybody should be able to access the data. All right. Excellent. And then we also looked at the SLT. We looked at three different scenarios. I'm not going to go through each one of them. Scenario one, if my source is SAP and target is a HANA system, the SLT system is nothing but my data migration server, DMIS or SLT. It can be installed within an existing source system like SAP ERP. What is the one condition for installing SLT inside a box? Anybody? We mentioned it in the previous session. What was the one condition that is required for an SLT? Perfect. Excellent. So the SLT can be only put into a system where the NetWeaver ABAP stack is greater than or equal to 7.02. That's the only condition that we have. If this particular box has that condition, and today I will show it to you in the system where to go and look for this information. If this criteria is satisfied, you can add the SLT system as an add-on to your ERP system or whatever SAP application. the connectivity between my SAP system and my another SAP system is always the interface is through something called as RFC, communication, remote function call. But in this case, because they both are sitting within the same system, the RFC is referred to as myself RFC. A connectivity between the SAP system and the database is through DB Connect. This is the first scenario. We saw the second scenario is I have a SAP ERP system. I have a HANA database. And let's say even if the NetWeaver ABAP stack is greater than 7.02, I can still bring it as a separate object, just that this has to be NetWeaver ABAP 7.02 or greater. The connectivity between this is RFC. The connectivity between this is DB Connect. This is the SLT system. And if the source system was a non-SAP system, a database like Oracle or SQL Server, of course, I cannot put my SLT inside a non-SAP box. So I have to bring SLT outside and I'll have my HANA system. The connectivity between a database and an SAP system is through DB Connect, and this also will be DB Connect. All right. Is everybody comfortable with the information that we covered up till now? By a quick show of yes or no, please. Excellent. So now let's move on to today's topic, which is we are going to talk about hopefully a couple of things. Time permits, we will be talking about. First one is how to do SLT configuration. And the second thing is we want to talk about the SLT architecture. These are the topics that we want to cover for today. So the first thing is configuration is nothing but how do I make this connectivity? We theoretically understand that you get a source system, you get a HANA system. This SLT box needs to be configured. Configured in the sense that you have to establish the RFC connectivity between the source and the SLT. You have to establish the DB connectivity between the SLT and the HANA system. And how does the HANA system then know that these are the list of tables that are available in the source system to be replicated? These are the things that you're looking at when we talk about SLT configuration. So there are some prerequisites for even getting started with the SLT configuration. A couple of them to be noted are, first thing is, obviously you should have an installation of your SLT completed, which means that you should have either brought this SLT as an add-on and installed it inside your source system, SAP source system, or you create a standalone SLT box and you have installed the software called SLT inside that. That is the first prerequisites. The second is establish if the source from which you're going to pull the data is an SAP application, you have to go and establish the RFC connection. And then for the target system, establish the DB Connect connection. So these three are prerequisites for, and I will show you how these establishing the RFC is done, establishing the DB Connect is all performed. Again, very, very important. You as HANA consultant or HANA modeler or HANA architect will not be allowed to perform this activity. This is a pure admin activity. Again, the reason why I'm giving you this information is if you get into a project and you are at a stage where they are initially setting up the SLT configuration, you can provide inputs to the admin on how to effectively create this SLT configuration. And not only that, when you go for interviews and you claim that you have several years of experience, they can ask you questions. If you have really worked on SLT, do you know how this procedure works? And you will be able to show your credibility by explaining the process. That's the intention. So these are the three prerequisites that you will need to do the configuration. Now, important certification question. People who are not familiar with SAP systems, if you have never worked on an SAP system, imagine the moment I log in into any SAP application, whether it is SAP ERP, SAP SRM, SAP BW, no matter what the application is, when you log in into an SAP system, on the top left corner, there will be a text box. The system has many screens. Just like any application, right? You go to an application, you will see screen after screen after screen of information. How do you navigate to a specific screen within that application? Is typically you would use some kind of a shortcut, right? Let's say I want to save a Word document in my desktop or laptop, or I want to open up a new file. I can go navigate to the menu, click on the item, and I can go through each individual item. Or if I know the hotkey or the shortcut, like Control C to do copy and Control V to paste, there are shortcuts in our application. Exact. Felix is absolutely right. And that's where I'm heading toward. Just like these hotkeys and shortcuts that you have in day-to-day application, if you want to jump to a specific screen within SAP application, this text box helps you do that. That text box is called transaction code box. Transaction code text box, or you can also call it as T code. Every page in your SAP screen has an associated T code, alphanumeric value. If you remember the alphanumeric value for that particular page, you can directly type it in and it will take you to that particular screen automatically. Or the left-hand side of the screen will also give you the navigation. It will give you a tree-like structure. You can navigate through the tree and figure out where you have to go, which is typically cumbersome. If you don't know where you're heading, it would be very convoluted. So it's good to know some of the commonly used transaction codes in the system. So why am I referring to this particular piece of information is for doing SLT activities. Now, SLT is also an SAP application. So imagine that I am logged in into SLT application, which is nothing but an SAP application. The screen is going to contain a transaction code, and there could be many screens of information available. There are three transaction codes, three T codes that are needed for you to perform SLT type of activity. The first one is called LTR. Just remember the transaction code LTR. Here is where SLT configuration is created and maintained. The second one is called LTRC. This is the controlling and monitoring of SLT activities. All your replication activities are going to be maintained and controlled in this particular transaction code. And the last one is LTRS. This is called Advanced Replication Settings. Here is where you would do transformation. If you had to do any transformation using SLT, that's going to be performed in the LTRS screen. So these three, you will get for sure at least one certification question from this particular three set of transaction code. All right, so these are the three transaction codes that you have to remember when I go into the system and perform any SLT activity. Now, as an admin, if I have decided to create a new configuration, what do I mean by a configuration? This is what I'm referring to. Let's assume that I have an SAP application. I have a HANA application. My infrastructure team has created a new SLT box that's readily available. Now I'm saying that I have to configure this particular box. What do I mean by configuring this box? It is nothing but this box has to now establish a connectivity to my source system. So I have to establish an RFC connection to make this SAP source system talk to the SLT system. I have to make this SLT system talk to the SAP HANA system through a DB Connect capability. In addition to this, after I have set the RFC and I've set the DB connection, I have done the E part of my ETL. In data provisioning, what is that? It is stands for extraction, which means establishing your connectivity between the source and the target system. This SLT needs to be further configured so that you can actually start replicating the data from here to here. So there are additional steps that are needed to do the configuration, to make this configuration ready for replicating data from your source system to your target system. There are a 6-step configuration process. We have to go through the 6-step configuration process in order to figure out how to perform the configuration. So before I go into doing the 6-step configuration process, let me switch on to the other system, show you a couple of things just to give you a visualization of what we are talking about. And then I'll come back to this whiteboard and explain the 6 steps. So that way you will understand it better. Give me 1 second. Okay, so Vijaya is saying that mine is good. So Vijaya, can you do me a small help? Make sure that you're typing the chat just to me. And can you provide me your user ID password? Just make sure that it's just to me and not to the entire group. I'll see if I can log in with your ID. And because for some reason it's not working on mine, I don't want to just keep trying this. On the chat window, select my name and then just send it to me, if that's okay. So it should normally, just a second, let's try it once more. Okay, so Mike is saying you can. So if anybody is able to see my chat window, just as the presenter, if you can please pass on my the user ID and password, I can try that and see if that helps. Because without showing the screen, I won't be able to make much progress today. Okay, let's see if I can get another user ID password. Mike, were you able to send it to me? Yeah, select Suman and then you can just type in the information. It should. So just type in the user ID alone first, and I'll confirm if I can, if I'm receiving the user ID. Then you can pass the password to me. Okay, I think I got one. So let me try. Let's see if this works. Okay, appreciate it. So I think I'm using Vijayata's system now. All right, so the couple of things I wanted to show before we move forward is, if you remember, when I log in into an SAP system, this is the client, SAP logon client. It will show me the list of all the applications that I have connectivity to. You will see it is showing me that there are two systems, SAP BW on HANA and SAP ERP system, which is nothing but ECC. So I'm going to first, let's assume that this is my source system. It will ask me for a user ID and password. Now I'm logged in into a SAP system. Can everybody see the screen? This is the SAP screen. This is how any SAP application screen will look like. You will have the navigation on the left side, and here is where your actual transaction screens would appear. On the top left corner, you will see that there is a transaction code box. Here is where you will type in the alphanumeric value to get to a specific screen. Now, this particular system, you need to understand what kind of a NetWeaver application it's running on. For that, you can just go to the top menu and click on the system, and you can go to status. It will open up a pop-up box. This is standard for any SAP application. You open up anything, whether this is the SAP system, SAP ERP or BW system, or even your SLT box. If you have a separate SLT application, you can do the same thing. You can come here and it will give you some information. It will say that this particular SAP system is running on a Windows NT operating system. It is being supported by a SQL Server database, because every SAP application has an application layer and a database layer, right? The application layer is your SAP ECC. The database on which it's running is SQL Server. But where will I find the information on the ABAP stack is, if you see, look at the product version. This is this application layer information. This is the database layer information. On the application layer information, you will see that there is a product version and there is a magnifying glass. Click on that. It will open up the information. So here, the second line item says SAP ABAP. The ABAP NetWeaver is currently running on a 7.40 version. What is our requirement for an SLT system to be inside this SAP box? It has to be at least 7.02. So in this particular system, the ABAP NetWeaver stack is 7.40, which means that this particular box, if I decide to do the SLT as an add-on installation, I could do that. And that's what the training team has done. They have used, because this box qualifies that criteria, NetWeaver ABAP stack is greater than or equal to 7.02. They went ahead and installed SLT directly. So if I had gone into the status, and if I go into this, I should be able to figure out if there is a component for SLT listed here. See, there could be different naming convention. It might be hard to figure out what particular component was added here. So the add-on configuration of SLT would be listed in this particular product version. The first thing that I wanted you to know is how to look for whether that particular box is a NetWeaver ABAP stack greater than or equal to 7.02. Now, in this particular case, so this particular system, this is my ECC system, okay, SAP ERP system, which is my source. And in that same box, SLT has been installed as an add-on. So imagine for a minute, imagine that this particular box did not have the SAP ERP source system. This is only an individual SLT. ECC means ERP Central Component. That's the latest naming convention they had come up with for the ERP system. If you remember R1, R2, R3, and then it became ERP, and then they finally called it as a ECC, ERP Central Component. That was the latest convention used until the system changed into a S4 HANA system. Okay, it's just the naming convention of an ERP system within SAP. Now imagine that this particular box that I have opened is purely an SLT system and it has nothing to do with my ERP source system. Okay, so what are the three transaction codes that I can use for an SLT configuration or SLT type of activity is LTR, LTRC, and LTRS. So let's start with the LTR. I'm typing in the transaction code called LTR and hit enter. It should now open up a pop-up screen. Let's say ask me later. And close this. So a pop-up screen opens up. It automatically opens up Internet Explorer or some kind of a web browser. And it's asking me what I want to do. Because this is a training site, don't worry about it. I'm going to say continue with this website, even though it is not recommended. So when I type in the transaction code LTR and hit enter, a pop-up window web browser opened up and it's asking me to provide the credentials once more. I'll provide the same credentials I used to log in and hit enter. Now, can you see that I am in the configuration and monitoring dashboard of the SLT system? Currently, they have created, the administration team, the server team has created a configuration. They've called it as ECC HANA sidecar. I'm thinking that the name, what it means is the connectivity is between ECC, which is my ERP system, and the HANA system. And it is used for a sidecar implementation. That's probably the naming convention, ECC to HANA sidecar. And then what is the source system? The source system is the ERP system. How will I know? If I go back to the ECC system, in this particular scenario, both my ECC ERP system and SLT resides in the same box. Look at the server name, EHP71IDES.com. That's the server name of the SAP ERP system. The same name is provided here, which tells me that this particular SLT configuration has been created to establish connectivity between my ERP source system and the HANA system has been given an IP address. Instead of calling it as HANA box, they have taken the corresponding IP address information and provided it here. Now, we are going to go through this process of creating the configuration. The server name, I'll show it to you. So if I go back to the application, if you go back to the application screen, on the bottom right corner, if you're looking at my cursor, you can see that the same server name is listed here. Or if you don't see it here, there is another place where you can find it also. When you go to the client, the logon pad, you can click on this item and click on change item. And it should provide you the server name and the application information. This is the system ID. This is the instance number. An application can be referred by an application server IP address or by a server name. You can pick it up from either place. You can use this name or you can use that IP address to do your configuration. Okay, so the idea of an SLT configuration, if you look at this particular screen, it is establishing connectivity between my source system. In this case, it's SAP ERP, and my target system, SAP HANA system. Now, what we are going to understand is how is this connectivity established? At a theory level, at a high level, does it make sense so far as to what is the intention of this configuration? This intention is you have a box, SLT box created. Assume that this is my SLT application. It's a brand new application. You have logged in. Now you have to establish that connectivity or the configuration so that you can talk to the SAP ERP source system and talk to the target SAP HANA system. That's the connectivity establishment or the configuration that we are trying to do. So I had mentioned now the SLT is installed here. This box is ready. This is an SLT box, let's assume. There are two other prerequisites I had mentioned. You have to establish an RFC connection to the SAP source system, and you have to establish a connection to the HANA system through a DB Connect. So even for that, there is a transaction code. To connect, to make and maintain your RFC connections, there is a transaction code called SM59. SM59 is a transaction code. If you enter that and click, and if you type that in and click enter, it would take you to the screen where all the RFC connections are created and maintained. If I click on it, it will take me to a screen called configuration of RFC connection. RFC is remote function call. It is an SAP proprietary object, and that is ABAP is the language that is used by SAP to maintain it. So if I expand this ABAP connection, these are the list of all the things. So if I go back here, it will also tell me that the RFC connection they have created to connect to the SAP ERP ECC system, they called it as sidecar_test. So I'll go back to the screen. Here is the list of all the RFC connections they have established. If I scroll down and look for sidecar test, let me open this up. Again, you as a HANA consultant will not be allowed to do this configuration. I'm only showing you this because you should have an understanding of what is going on. They would come here and then they would give it a meaningful description, and then on the administration tab, they would have the user ID, who created it, what time it was created and all that. Technical settings is the critical piece. It will tell me what is the host. So I am establishing an RFC connection. Imagine this is my SLT box. I'm talking to my left side, which is the source system. In this case, it's an ERP system. What is the name of the server? We saw that, right? In this box, SAP ERP is also sitting in the same box. So I'm using this particular server name. That's going to be my source that I'm connecting to. How will I connect to this particular system? I would need a user ID and password. That information is stored here. So when you come and create the new RFC connection, you will say what is the server name to which I'm connecting, what are the user ID password to be stored for every time connectivity to that particular system. So that's the information that you would provide in this RFC screen. If I go back, I'll quickly show you. Let's say I wanted to create a brand new RFC connection. Again, we wouldn't be creating it. I'm just showing it for understanding. I'll say that sidecar test 2. I'm not going to create it. It's going to be an ABAP connection. I'll just say and then I would choose what's the name of the target host. I'll identify what, if it's, let's say I want to establish a connectivity to the BW system. I have a BW system here. If I open that and let me log in into that, you will see that the screen will look exactly similar to the previous screen. The transaction code box, the navigation screen, and if you look at it, the server name of this particular system is SAP BW. Can everybody see that? SAP BW is the server name. So what I would do is I would take that information, and if I'm establishing a new connectivity, I will say the target SAP BW is the source name. And if I had connectivity, I should not be entering this, so I won't enter this information. I would provide my user ID and password, and I would save this information. That way, I am now establishing a connectivity between my SLT box and the source system. In this case, the source system is now an SAP BW system. Does that make sense for everybody? By a quick show of yes or no, please. All right. So that is how somebody would go ahead and create an RFC connection. Let's say no. I'm back to my original screen. I'm still within the SLT system. To avoid confusion, I will close this BW system. Okay, so now I have established, Vijayata has a question, RFC is initiated from source to SLT. It can be initiated in either system. Since an RFC can only be maintained between two SAP systems, Vijayata, you could have initiated, you could have created, you could have gone into the ERP system, which is your SAP source system. You could have gone to the same transaction code SM59, and you could have established a create RFC from there and said my target in this case is going to be the SLT system. You could have done it that way, or you can also go to the SLT system and do it vice versa. The RFC can be maintained on any of the SAP systems that is talking to each other. Okay. Now, we have established how to create the RFC connection between the source SAP ERP system and the SLT system. We also need to understand how to create the DB connection between the SLT system and the HANA system, right? So the transaction code for that is DB02. DB number 0, number 2, enter. So in this particular screen, where you are going to create, so let me see, system landscape, database connection. If I expand the system landscape and go to database connection, if I double click on it, it will show me the list of all the databases that I'm connected to. Assuming that I'm still in the SLT box, if I expand this HANA database, there are so many connectivities that are established, DB Connect. Let me go back here. Connection to the target HANA system. I need to figure out. Give me 1 second. Oh, it's asking me to, now let me try it again. Schema name. I'm trying to figure out the 192, 161. Okay. So these are all connected to that. Let me quickly make sure. I'm trying to figure out what's the DB Connect name they have provided. Just a second. So the RFC connection is called sidecar_test. ECC HANA sidecar. I don't think that's. I'm thinking it's this connectivity that they have used. So if I go into one of this connection, it would tell me what's the system, what are the port number. If you remember, port number is nothing but the 2 digits in the middle. 01 is the instance number that we are initiating for the SAP system. The connection parameter, the user ID password is provided, and that is how a DB connect is established between the SLT system and the target HANA system. So these are the prerequisites. The RFC connection needs to be established, and yeah, absolutely. Mike is saying, can you repeat it? So are you good with the information on the RFC, Mike? How the RFC is created between the SAP source system and SLT? Similarly, you come to a screen called, let me take you back to the initial screen, and you type in the transaction code DB02. That's where you would go ahead and create a database DB connect. So I would come to this particular screen, expand the system landscape, and there is an option for database connections. I'll double click on that. Now I'm trying to establish a connectivity between my SLT system and the HANA system, the target HANA system. I would go click on this SAP HANA database. These are all the connectivity that are created. I think this is the one that is currently being used. If you can see, I think this is the permanent connection they have created. So if you want to add a new connectivity, just click on this new button. Again, this is an activity that an administrator would create. You would give it a name. You would say HANA test or something like that. You're connecting to a HANA database. Connection maximum that you won't know, only the administrator would know what it is. You would provide a user ID and password, and you would provide the database host name. The host name could be HANA box, and the port number. Port number is, if you remember, our instance number is a 2-digit number, 01, but it has to be always written as 3, then the 2-digit instance, which is 01, and then always finish it with a 15. And you would provide this, and you would click on save. That would establish the connectivity between your SLT system and the HANA system. So just like when you use HTTP URL, right? The port number is invariably 8080. So the SQL port is the port through which the SQL statements will communicate back and forth through the HANA system. That's what the SQL port is all about. It has to, they have configured it such a way that HANA port will always listen to a 5-digit number, 3XX15. The XX will be replaced by the instance number of your HANA system. And how would I know the instance number of the HANA system? If I go into my HANA Studio, yeah, it's just a naming convention. Let me log in into the system. And you will notice, if I hover on top of this particular system, HANA box 01. 01 is the instance number of this particular system. So that is what gets plugged into that 3XX15 port number. The XX is replaced with this 01. All right, did that help answer your question, Mike? Excellent. All right, so now that you understand that these prerequisites can be completed by logging into your SLT box, I will walk you through this 6-step process. If I click, let's assume that this connectivity did not exist. This configuration did not exist, and you were, as the administrator, you were asked to go create a new SLT configuration. You would click on this new button, and do you see that there is a 6-step process? It won't let me move past the second one because I don't have the authority to do it. In the first step, it is asking me to create generic information. What do you want to call this configuration? If you look at it, the earlier configuration was called as ECC_A HANA_sidecar. I can call it whatever I want. I can say HANA sidecar or something like that. I'm just giving a name. This name has a significant meaning. When you go through the 6-step process and you click on the confirmation, when this configuration is being activated, this name that we are typing in the configuration becomes very critical. Why so? The moment you have created, completed the confirmation, it will take this name or this name in this case. If I go to the SAP HANA system, if I expand the catalog and scroll down, do you see a schema with the same name? Everybody? This is the name of the ECC HANA sidecar is the name of the configuration they had created. When it is successfully created, it will go create a schema automatically in the system. So what does that mean to us? Whatever data I am bringing through this particular SLT, all that table information will get stored within this particular schema. Can you randomly throw the data into any section within the catalog, or does it have to go into a specific schema? So through the SLT configuration process, the name that you provide to the configuration gets created as a schema. And if I expand that particular schema and go to the table section, all the tables that are replicated through this particular SLT replication will get stored in this particular schema. Does that make sense for everybody? By a quick show of yes or no, please. All right. So let me go back. I would enter on the first screen. I would enter information. I would just give it a general naming convention. I will say, this is the naming convention I want to use to create the configuration. If you want to give a description, you can give it. If your organization is maintaining roles, authorization groups and all that, they can add a group here. If not, you don't have to provide it. Once you have provided, the critical information on this particular screen is giving a name for their configuration. Give a meaningful name, because this name will end up becoming a schema name in your HANA system when you complete this 6-step process. Mike has a question. Do array first. Schema doesn't need to be there. Through this process, as and when I click on this confirmation step and say submit, when the configuration is running through and activating, as an integral part of that activity, it will have, because if you remember, the DB connection is now established between the SLT system and HANA system. It has the authority to go and create a schema on the fly as part of that configuration step. It will go create it, and you would see a new schema added to the system. All in one step. Yeah, this all happens in one step. If you go through the 6th step, by the 6th step, you would have given information about what is the source system you're connecting to, what is the target system you're connecting to. Specific transfer settings are all established. You review the process and you click confirmation. At the moment it is being submitted, it will go create a new schema on the SAP HANA system. Okay. So the takeaway from the step 1 is that you have to give a meaningful naming configuration and then click on next. Now it's going to ask you information about your source system. Mike has a question. How about the size of the schema? So by default, the administrators would have said, anytime a new schema gets created, allocate X amount of space for it by default. So anytime a schema gets created, it would come up with a default schema. But then if you need additional information, exactly, a default schema value size would be provided. But then later, admin can go and adjust it as needed. Okay. So now in the second step, we are going to now say, what is the source to which we are connecting? In our scenario, we are trying to bring data from an SAP ERP application to SLT. Is everybody with me? So what would be my source connection? Would I use a RFC connection or a DB connection? If my source is an SAP ERP system, I would choose my RFC connection, correct? Because in this particular scenario, my SLT and SAP ERP are both in the same box, we would refer to that as a my RFC connection. But in general terms, it is called an RFC connection. So it gives you a toggle switch to identify whether the source is an SAP system or a non-SAP system. If I choose the RFC connection, you can go click on this drop down and search for the RFC connection that you have created, because the prerequisite is you should have created an RFC connection, right? So I can, if you remember, I think it was called sidecar test or something like that. I would select this, and then I will come to this. I will explain what this allow multiple usage or read from a single client is all about. Okay. So for now, I am saying whether I am establishing a connectivity to an SAP source system or a non-SAP. If it is an SAP source system, I would choose the RFC connection. Is everybody with me so far? Did that prerequisite come in handy now? Because we had already gone into SM59 transaction code and created an RFC connection. I'm just picking that RFC connection. So now the system automatically will know, because you're using this RFC connection, you are connecting to this particular SAP ERP system, because all the credentials about that ERP system is already stored in this RFC. But if you did not choose your RFC connection, you chose a DB connection. See, the options changes right away. And you will see that these are all the possible list of sources that you can connect to. You can connect to a MaxDB. What is a MaxDB? It is a database that was originally created by SAP. IBM DB2, IBM DB4, IBM DB6, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, Sybase. Sybase is also another SAP database. This is also a SAP HANA database, right? I can also bring data from one HANA database push it into another database, correct? So, but SAP HANA is not it's not treated as an SAP application, because the type of connectivity we use also is DB Connect. We don't use an RFC. So it's treated like a database. The moment you bring data from an SAP HANA source system, it would be a DB connection. So these are the list of approved systems. So if I select SAP HANA as a source system, it will ask you, what DB Connect have you already created for this? If you remember the DB02 transaction code we went to, you would have established the DB connection and you would specify what's the schema from which you're going to bring the data. So this is how you would play around either with the RFC connection or with a DB connection. If I select the RFC connection, the option of allow multiple usage and read from single client, keep that in your mind. When I go back to the whiteboard, I'll explain that concept to you, because it's difficult for me to talk through this without using a whiteboard. So once I've done this, I will click on next. Most likely it will throw an error saying that this is already being used. So I won't be able to move forward. Essentially what would happen is, if this connection was new, Kriya B02, I'm not sure what that means, Mike. I'm not. Yeah, so here it's not allowing me to move forward because I am already using this. This already is established, right? That particular connectivity. The sidecar test is already connected with this particular configuration. So I cannot, they are not allowing, first of all, I'm not an admin in this system. So they are not allowing me to go forward with creating another new configuration for SLT. That's what they're trying to do here. But imagine that you have created a brand new RFC. You would enter that here and you would click on the next, and it would take you to the third step. The third step is going to ask you, tell me what is the HANA system that you're connecting to. Essentially, you would provide Because now the third is specify the target system. The target system gives you information about the HANA system to which we are sending information. Stepwise, you would do SM59 and then DB2. That is correct, because SM59 typically is the source, right? You're establishing your SM59 RFC connection to establish connectivity between source and SLT. And then from SLT to SAP HANA is through DB Connect. Okay. So I will explain these next few settings because I cannot move forward here. Let me show you from the existing connectivity. If I click on this existing configuration, can you see that the second step asked me for this information? Source system, you used an RFC connection. Target system, I'm connecting it to a SAP HANA database. And this is the information. It took the name of your configuration name and created a corresponding schema. In the fifth step, there are some transfer settings. These are the transfer settings. How many available bandwidth do you want and how much is going to be defined and how much is going to be running? I'll explain that in a minute. So these are so this is step 2, this is step 3, and this is step 4. And then step 5 is confirmation, that is reviewing and confirming it. And step 6 is clicking on the button to say confirm. Now let me stop here for a second, move to the whiteboard and explain this process a little more detail so you can understand it better. Okay. So we understood that in order to perform the 6-step configuration, imagine the scenario, right? So I'll give you the scenario so that you can keep this in context. Here is my SLT box. Here is my HANA system, which is the target. And here is my SAP ERP. In this case, they're calling it as ECC system. This is the source. This is the target. I log into this SLT system. There is a transaction code box. I first enter SM59. It will take me to the screen called RFC creation screen. I will create a RFC connection. I will say, establish the connectivity between these two systems. So what did I provide? I provided, so this particular server, this ECC system has a server name, let's call it EHP7IDESCOMM. I think that was a server name it had. So I go to this SLT screen. I go to the screen called SM59 and I establish a new connectivity. I call this as sidecar test, and I provided all the credentials needed to establish the connectivity to this source SAP ECC system. Mike and everybody, are you comfortable with this information so far? That was the first step that we did. So this connectivity has been established. Then in the same SLT system, I went to another transaction code called DB02. I established a connectivity. Let's call this HANA box, as they had given 192.98.1.18. Some IP address was associated with this HANA server. I created a HANA SLT connection, some name, and I established the connectivity between this system and my SLT. So these two configuration, these RFC has been built. This DB Connect has been created. Is everybody with me so far? By a quick show of yes or no. We just explained how you would establish the RFC and how you would establish the DB Connect. Now, to bring all this together, I'm going to, here is my SLT box. Imagine that I have created a sidecar test. This is an RFC connection. And let's assume that I have created a HANA SLT. This is a DB connect. This is all I have done. Okay, I have not done anything else. These are the 2 steps I have created. Now there is this SAP system. Here is my HANA system. This knows that it is connecting to this particular system. This RFC tells me that I'm establishing a connection to my ECC application. And this DB connect tells me that I'm going to be establishing a connection to my HANA system. But how will I set this configuration is I'm going to walk you through a 6-step process. The first step is basic or general information. So it will ask me information. Give me the name for the SLT configuration. Let's say I'm going to say sidecar SLT. Let's assume that this is the name I come up with. It can be any name. The moment you give a name, a couple of things are going to happen. This configuration that you are now creating within SLT will be called as sidecar underscore SLT. That's the name of this entire configuration. Okay. If you want, you can give it a description, a meaningful description. And if there was any authorized AD group that you wanted to create, you can provide that. That's not necessary. Couple of things that you have to remember is the name you give here will eventually become a schema inside your HANA system. Whatever name you gave, sidecar underscore SLT, that will become a schema inside your HANA system. And any data that you're bringing from the source system would go and land inside that particular schema. Everybody with me so far? So that's the criticality of this step 1. It's just telling me, hey, give a meaningful name to the configuration, because that is what will become your schema on the HANA side. Okay, it's the name that you provide in the configuration is what is going to become your schema inside the HANA system. Once you have provided that information, the second is specify source system information. See, the system now doesn't know anything about the source or the target yet, right? Because it's individual box now. This individual box doesn't know what source I'm connecting to, what target I'm connecting to yet. It just knows that there are some RFC connections created, some DB connections created within the system, but it exactly doesn't know what's the source I'm connecting to and what's this target. Because I'm creating a new SLT configuration, I have to tell this particular configuration is going to talk to an SAP ECC system and send information to a HANA system. So now it's asking me what's the source from which you're going to bring the data. It will give you 2 options. Are you going to connect to an SAP system? That's what this connection means. Or are you connecting to a DB connect system? If you chose this radio button, you're saying that the source is an SAP application. If you choose this one, you're saying you're connecting to some kind of a database, a certified database. That's what you're establishing. If you chose this RFC connection, the system will say, tell me what is the RFC connection name to talk to this source SAP application. And it will throw a drop-down box. Now, where did your prerequisite come in handy? If everybody remembers, we had created a RFC connection that establishes connectivity to a SAP ECC application. So if I say the RFC connection I'm using is called sidecar test, wouldn't the system know automatically all the information about my SAP source system? The moment I selected this, this is nothing but the thing that we created in SN59. So this knows that you are talking to an SAP ECC application. So for this configuration that we are creating, I am establishing connectivity to a SAP ECC application. I provide this information. The system now knows everything that I need to know about the source system. Would everybody agree? Just by providing the RFC communication information right here, I have told the system, okay, SLT, now you know who you're talking to, who your source is. Chen Ganesh has a question. Assume source is SAP on HANA. In this case, which connection type would be better in terms of performance? If it's an SAP on HANA system, then you would still go from the application side, because in that case, it's still treated as an SAP application. But if you go on to a S4 HANA source system, then you can choose either the RFC connection or HANA connection. Preferably, I think the connection would be a DB connection, because you would go against the HANA system. There is a little bit of nuances to explain that, Chen. The reason is it all depends on the type of licensing you have on the S4 HANA system also. That will help. Some S4 HANA systems will be licensed to your organization, saying that you can only reach that system through the S4 application layer. They won't allow you to touch the database directly. If your licensing is created such a way that you can only work through the application layer of your S4 HANA, then in that case, you have to establish an RFC connection, which means that you are going to bring data from an application layer. Correct. So suite on HANA, that's the other thing I was explaining, right? In a suite on HANA, HANA is just like any other database. It's like your SAP ECC is running on an Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server. It's just like that. So in our current system, in our training system, you saw that our SAP ECC was being supported by a Microsoft SQL Server database. So even though it is a SQL Server database that's supporting the SAP system, we still went with the RFC connection, because I wanted to create the established connectivity only through the RFC. Okay, because suite on HANA also will have restrictions that you cannot directly do manipulation at the HANA database layer. They will only allow you to send information, take information through the application. So in such cases, you would use RFC connection. Okay, specifically for S4 HANA, it could be that if the S4 HANA has a wide license, an enterprise license, and they allow you to work with both the application layer and the database layer, then you can pick the HANA database and create a database connectivity to send the data. But if you're connecting it through the restriction of the application layer, then you would choose RFC information. All right. So here is where you specify. So the recommendation is go through application layer using RFC connection. Correct. When you're in doubt whether, if you don't know whether you have access to the underlying HANA, it's better to go treat it as an SAP application and use the RFC route. All right. So in the source system, when we specifically talked about RFC connection, there were two other options. Allow multiple usage and read from a single client. There were two options. Again, these are strictly questions that are going to be asked in an interview or in a certification. In a real world scenario, these options don't get checked. Where I have worked in so many different projects, I've never seen this actively being used, these two options. They just are used from a certification and from an interview standpoint. Mike has a question. SAP ERP is completely different from SAP HANA. Correct. SAP ERP is the online transactional system. ERP is where you have that finance, logistics, human resource modules, where your transaction comes in and gets stored. SAP HANA is more like your data warehousing tool, which is used for all OLAP, Online Analytical Processing System, which is nothing but for your reporting scenario, mainly used for reporting purposes. So just to quickly explain what these two options are, allow multiple usage. If you enable this particular scenario, what is going to happen is, imagine here is your SLT system. Let's assume that I'm connecting to a SAP ECC source system and I have SAP HANA here. If let's assume that I have a table A that I want to replicate from here to here and I want to send it to HANA. I have created a, let's call it the configuration as SLT. Let's just simply name the configuration name as SLT. Like in your first step. Would everybody agree? I'm just calling it for ease purpose. I'm calling the configuration name as SLT. So what happens? A schema called SLT would have got created in my SAP HANA system. Would everybody agree with me so far? If this configuration was created successfully, taking the name of the configuration, it would have gone and created a schema within my SAP HANA system. Now the intention is I want to send this data from table A and I want to go and send it here as table A. If this option was never available, allow multiple usage, one configuration, that is SLT configuration, can take data from one source system and send it to only one target. This is a one-to-one mapping scenario. Would everybody say agree? There is a table called A in SAP system, SAP ECC system. I took that, I passed it through the SLT and I pushed it into a schema and I called it as table A. If I allowed multiple usages, I can bring the same table A, I can send it to two different HANA systems. There can be a HANA system 1 and a HANA system 2. I can send it to multiple target systems. Again, there is no direct relevance of use case with same connection. You can use the same connection. If you have established this allow multiple usage, it will allow the same RFC connection to send data to multiple DB Connect target systems. It will allow you to do that. But in a real world scenario, they will never do that in a production environment because it is risky. You could corrupt the data. The idea that I want to convey here is you can send it. There are multiple scenarios. You can send it to, at a maximum, it is 1:4. That's the connectivity that you can. Exactly. So Vijayata asked the right question. You can only send it to maximum of 4 connections, 4 possible ways. And I will explain what those 4 possible. So one source can use the same SLT configuration to send it to 4 different HANA systems. I can have a HANA box called HANA 1, HANA 2, HANA 3, and HANA 4. I can send the same table A information to all the 4 different systems. That is one possible way. Or I can use one source, let's say table A, through the SLT configuration. I can send it to one HANA box, but I can send it to 4 different schemas. I can create 4 different schemas called schema 1, schema 2, schema 3, and schema 4. And the same table A can be sent to 4 different schemas within the same box. Again, theoretically, it's okay, but practically, do you see replicating the same data table A in 4 different schemas within the same box? You won't do it, right? You're duplicating the data. But from a certification standpoint, they will ask you, if the option allow multiple usage is enabled, what is the maximum number of systems that you can affect? Your answer is 1:4. That is, you can have a maximum of 4 parallel connections established. That is all that you will have to know about this particular allow multiple usage process. All right. The next option they have asked is read from a single client. Sometimes this question might be a little bit misleading. The moment I say client, what comes to your mind? You probably think of HANA Studio, or you probably think of the SAP logon pad we just used to log in into an SAP system, right? There is another client. If you remember, I don't know if how many people remember, when I opened up the SAP logon pad and I clicked on, there was SAP ECC and SAP BW for HANA. When I clicked on this option, a screen opened up where I could enter my user ID and password, right? In that particular screen, you notice that there was a user ID object and a password to enter. But on top of that, there was something called as a client, and a 3-digit number was made available. We didn't do anything. I can show it to you once more when I get back to the system. But what I'm essentially trying to say here is there was a 3-digit number, like it will typically say like a 800, 900, 100, 110. It could be any number. It will be a 3-digit number. What is the significance of that is, let's assume that I have a development SAP ECC or ERP system that's available. There are two major projects that are going on in the system. One is a team of developers are working on finance related development. They are doing something that is related to, so they are probably going to 10 different transaction codes that are finance related, and they are making modification to those screens. Similarly, at the same time, a set of sales developers are also working on the system, and they are making some sales related changes. See, the transaction system like ERP and ECC system, even when I do a sales related changes, that will have some impact to finance objects. When I'm doing finance related changes, it might have some impact to sales objects. Now I could be working on some major changes. I could be changing the screens according to my wish based on the finance changes, and that could have a negative impact on my sales development and vice versa. So in order to isolate the effort done by the finance developers and the sales developer, what typically happens in an SAP world is when they create this development system called SAP ECC. Imagine this is the big box, right? This SAP box, which is an ECC system. They will say, I'm going to divide this box into 2 different clients. I'm going to say, I'm going to create a client called 800, and I'm going to create a client called 810. They are both sitting inside the same box. This will have the same number of finance tables and will have the same number of sales tables. This will also have the same number of finance tables and same number of sales tables. I will say all finance developers log in into the 800 client and make your modification. So if let's say finance 1, finance 2, finance 3, sales 1, sales 2, and sales 3. Let's assume that this is the starting point. Both the clients have the same number of tables. Now I allow the finance users to go into this 800 client box and make modification. They went ahead and wiped off finance 1 table. They did not need that information. In the finance 2 table, they added 2 more new fields. So they have made modification to this particular system, while the other sales team logs in into the 810 client, and they would still see that the original finance table F1 and the original model of F2. Everything is intact, and I can go and make changes to the S3 table, which is sales related table. So I'm isolating the changes that are made by the finance team and the SAP sales team. I'm segregating the effort at a point when we have said that, okay, the finance developers in the 800 client tells me everything has been completed. And when sales team says that everything has been completed, I can merge the information to bring it to a final form. But until the final development is completed, I can maintain the system as two different clients within the same box. So now the question, read from a single client. If by default this is not enabled, this will. Mike has a question. What about possible conflicts? Yeah, so that's why you have the testing and all that, right, in the project. So what will happen is, if the 800 client has made a significant change to the finance tables, they have to communicate that to the sales team and make sure that there is an integration testing and there is a functional testing in place to make sure that nothing has negatively impacted the current activities. So there is a process through which they will go through and make sure that all that issues have been identified and acted upon before they can go into production system. Okay. So the read from a single client, what it means is, it could possibly mean that in order for me to work on this finance activities, I probably on this F2 table, I loaded, let's say 10 million records. To work on my project, I would be, let's assume that there are 10 million records loaded in this table. Because on the second system, on the second 810 client, because I'm primarily focused on sales data, I probably was okay to just work with 500 records on the similar F2 table on the 810 client. By default, when I say I'm bringing data from this SAP ECC system through the SLT, I'm sending the data to my HANA system. I've identified a table called F2, which is the finance table I want to replicate. I push the data from here to here, and it goes into this particular, within the schema, I'm loading the F2 table. Now, if this option is not selected, which is the default scenario, given the example here, can anybody tell me how many records will land in this HANA table called F2? Client 800 within that SAP ECC system contains 10 million records. Client 810 within that particular same ECC system contains additional 500 records. So a total of 10 million 500 records will flow into my HANA system. So essentially what it is saying is, it will bring in, if you have not specified this option called read from a single client, if there are multiple clients within your SAP ECC system, it will bring data from both the clients. In the F2 table, if there is 10 million from table 800 client and 810 client has 500, it will combine all that. So when the table gets loaded here, the first column in this table will be called client. First 10 million records will have a client value of 800. And then the last 500 will have an 810 value. That is how always the default capability of this system replication will work. If you did not say anything, so somebody I had asked a question, is there a limit on how many clients an SAP system can have? Theoretically, no. But typically you won't see more than 2 or 3 clients within a system, because you have to allocate the existing resources to these 2 clients, right? You don't want to bombard it with too many clients. By default, it will bring data from all the clients and push it into your HANA system. If you enabled this option, Then it would ask you what particular client from which you want to bring the data. I can say, I only want to bring the data from client 810. Then in that case, it would avoid bringing the data of 10 million records. It's only bringing the data for 500. Does that make sense for everybody? I know people who are not familiar with SAP might find the concept of client a little bit difficult. But if you can just understand the explanation that I'm providing, assume that an SAP system can have multiple clients, which means that think of it as it's divided into multiple chunks. One chunk can be used by some developers and another chunk can be used by another set of developers. So creating a delineation between the two clients. When you do this settings, you are saying that by default, this option is not selected. Let me see if I can erase this. By default, this option will not be enabled, which means that it will bring data from all the clients within that SAP system. If you specifically only want to bring data from a specific client, you can enable that and specify the client from which you want to bring the information. Only on the that's a very good question, Mike. This client concept only works on a development box. Always the production system will only have one client. It will never have multiple clients because no development activity will happen in the production system, right? Only when there is development happening, you will have multiple clients in that system. Got it? So now we have seen there are two steps. Step 1, name of the SLT configuration. And we said, let's call it, I think they had, let's use the same naming convention they have used. Just a second, my eraser is not working. I think they called it ECC HANA sidecar, just to be consistent. This is the name they have given for the configuration. In step 2, specify source system information. We said, are you using an RFC connection or a DB connection? We chose this. We gave the RFC connection information. The name of the RFC connection information was sidecar _ test was the connection that we selected. We said allow multiple usage. They have enabled, I don't know, somebody probably for trial purposes, they clicked on it and there is read from single client. That was not enabled. It was just left open. So we provided information about the source system. Next step, step 3, specify target system. So it will ask you, it automatically knows that you are sending this SLT data to a HANA target system. So it will ask HANA server name. You have to provide that HANA server name. You have to provide the instance number. You have to provide the user ID and password. Is everybody with me so far? Step 3 seems to be straightforward, right? You're just giving information as to how you would, essentially what you would have done is, instead of giving all this, you would say the DB connect information. By providing the DB connect information, that automatically has all this information stored. So it knows which particular HANA system you're connecting to. The next step, step 4, is specify transfer settings. So it will ask you, how many data jobs do you want to have in the system? How many do you want to use for replication? and how many you want to use for calculation. And I'll explain what this means. Yeah, this is the instance number is the 01 number. If you remember the 2-digit number that we have in the HANA box, that's the number that you have to provide. So in this case, it would have been HANA box 01 and then whatever user ID and password we are using, that's what you would have given. Okay, Mike? Now, the next thing is specify the transfer settings. Okay, Mike, I think you are, I am not sure if that's a different language. I could be misreading it. I figured so much. Is that French? I'm just curious. Is that a French keyboard that you're using? Okay. All right. So what are we trying to do in the specified transfer setting is, imagine that I have a highway, like a car highway, right? Where vehicles can go. Let's assume that I have a highway and there are 3 lanes on one side and the 3 lanes on the other side. So a maximum of 6 parallel lanes are there. Would everybody agree? If I can draw this a little more neat for people to understand. Let's assume that this is the median in between. There is cars going this way. There is lane 1, lane 2, and lane 3. And cars going this way. Lane 4, lane 5, and lane 6. So in an interstate or in a highway, let's assume that there are only 6 possible roads that you can use to go in either direction. So this is the total bandwidth or total capacity. Would everybody agree? The total capacity of this interstate or highway is it can handle 6 lanes at any point of time. 6 parallel vehicles can travel at the same time. That's the total capacity. So that is exactly what this data job number is. It's asking me how many lanes do you have to send the replicated data. I have here, this is my SAP system. This is my SLT. And this is my HANA system. I have established the connectivity. I'm bringing data from, one second. I'm bringing data from a table called A in SAP. I want to bring it into HANA. It's asking me how many total lines do you have to bring data into my HANA system. If there is a total of, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there are total 5. The SLT system is configured such a way that it can send 5 lines of parallel information to the HANA system. Now, this is the total number of lines that are available. So you're saying I have a total of 5 lines or bandwidth pipelines that I can use to send information to SAP HANA system. But of all the 5 lines I have, that's the total lines of parallel lines I have to send the data to HANA system. I'm going to say the first 3 lines, I'm going to use it for replication, which means that I can bring data from table A, from table B. I will use the first 3 lanes only to send the data to the target system. Let's assume that there were 6 lines total. I will use the next 3 exclusively for any transformation to be performed while replicating the data. See, sometimes you can use SLT for doing transformation also, right? So you keep 3 lines or 3 lanes for your vehicles. In US, there is something called as the high operating vehicles, HOV lane. You can specifically say if your car or vehicle has more than 2 people, you get to travel in a special lane, which is a little bit faster than the usual lanes. So you're allocating 3 lanes out of your 6 lanes in the SLT system to say, if you're purely sending data from a source system to the target HANA system as is, without any replicate, without any transformation or modification, I will allow these first 3 lanes to be exclusively allocated for that. So you can fastly move this data from source to target. But if you are sending a table called C and you want to do some manipulation to that data before it gets landed to the target, then it's saying that I will allocate another 3 lanes exclusively for that. So anything that needs transformation will route it through this pipeline or this lane, and it will reach the target. So keeping this analogy in mind, it's asking what is the total number of lanes you have. I can probably say I have a total of 10 lanes. I have. Vijayata is absolutely right. I did not use those specific terminology, the bandwidth and resource allocation, Vijayata, because just I wanted to create a simple analogy for everybody to understand. If there were 10 pipelines that are available, I'm saying for exclusive replication, I will probably allocate 5. So 5 of those 10 resources are exclusively used for replication. I will say 2 I'm going to allocate for any transformation. So you might say 5 plus 2 is 7. There is still 3 data jobs or 3 lanes that are no longer used. I'm keeping it for future use. And the administrators can say that the system's ability. So the more number of lanes you use for the configuration mic, there will be additional cost associated with it. Typical SLT system will come up with some certain amount of resources. If you keep adding more and more resources to help with the replication faster, you will have to pay additional charges. So let's assume that your default setting comes with 10 data jobs. You will say, okay, right now it looks like I only need like 5 lanes for replication and 2 lanes for calculation. If there is a need for it, I will keep extending. I still have 3 freely available. I'll probably add 2 here and probably add 1 here later. So that is what the specified transfer settings is all about. It is asking you to set how many total data jobs do you have. Out of those data jobs, how much are you allocating for replication and how much are you allocating for calculation, which is nothing but your transformation. Subsequently, in the same step 4, it will ask you another question. Step 4, continue. It will ask you, what kind of replication are you trying to do? Are you doing a real-time replication? Or are you doing a scheduled based replication? Using this configuration that you're creating, which is ECC underscore A HANA underscore sidecar configuration that you're creating, do you want to do a real-time replication or do you want to do a scheduled based replication? If you chose this real-time replication, which is what people would typically choose because SLT is capable of doing SLT real-time replication, everything is instantaneous. If I say that move data from table a new data gets entered into this SAP ECC application into table A, it will immediately push it into the target HANA system. On the contrary, if you selected the scheduled base, it will give you multiple options. Do you want to do a time-based interval or do you want to do a day-based interval? Time-based in the sense you can say, I want to schedule it 1 hour, every 15 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 1 minute, every 10 seconds. You can come up with time-based interval, how frequently you want to push the data. Or you can even say, I want to do it every 24 hours, or I want to do it every Sunday, or I want to do it every Monday. Day-based interval. You can choose one of these options. So step 4, specified transfer settings will help you identify how many data jobs you are going to use, and what kind of a replication technique are you going to choose for your SLT configuration. Step 5 is review. It will bring all the information that you have provided so far from step 1 to step 4. It will say this is the name of your configuration you have provided, which is nothing but ECC underscore A HANA underscore sidecar. Your source information is routed through an RFC connection called sidecar test. That by itself will tell me what's the source system. This internally tells me I'm connecting to SAP ECC system. Target system, through my DB connection, I will know that I'm connecting to a HANA system. Step 4 would have given me the information about the data job and the replication technique. It will give me all this information on a screen and ask me to verify that. And finally, step 6, if everything looks good, I will submit the changes. This is what the 6 steps of a configuration looks like. The moment I click on this submit button, what happens is configuration takes effect immediately. As a subsequent step, it will take the name of the configuration that you have created. It will go into the HANA system and create a schema with that particular same name. This SLT configuration will also be given a mass transfer ID, a technical ID for this configuration. It's a 3-digit number that will be given. I think for our system, it was called 026. It will create a mass transfer ID. So the reason why I'm providing you this information is this is again a possible interview question. When you go through the 6-step configuration and submit your SLT configuration, what are the things that happens after you submit? After you submit, these are the things that you have to tell the interviewee. A schema gets created in the HANA system with the same name of the SLT configuration. That's one. A mass transfer ID, or it's also called as MTID, a 3-digit number gets created for this particular configuration. And third step is certain RS prefix tables gets created in HANA. In that configuration, you will have some RS tables. These are nothing but SLT based system related tables. The system itself will create some tables and it will maintain it, which means that if you're sending data from a source to a target, it will keep track of at what time, what data got from source to the target. It'll keep logs of all the information. I think there are 6 tables that will get created. Those 6 tables will have a prefix RS underscore orders table, RS underscore stats table, and so on and so forth. 6 tables will get created. And the final 4th thing is 3 tables from the source system will get automatically replicated without even you asking for a specific table. 3 tables from the source system will automatically get replicated. The tables are called DD02L, DD02T, and DD08L. I will explain what these 3 tables are, very important tables, in the next session. What I want you to take from this is you go through the 6 steps for configuration. The result of this 6-step configuration is you will have a schema with the configuration name. You will have a corresponding mass transfer ID number. RS tables will get created in that schema, and 3 tables will get replicated. DD02L, DD02T, and DD08L tables will get created. And I will show you this in the system tomorrow so that you also have a better understanding. Vijeta has a question. Can we separate real-time replication for few tables and scheduling for others? For example, I don't want real-time for all tables from source, but yes, you can do that. You cannot in the same SLT configuration, you cannot, because it's a radio button, Vijeta, it will only allow you to choose a real-time or a schedule. What you can do is you can have multiple configurations within that SLT system. One you can use for real-time and one you can use for schedule-based replication. Okay, but that is possible. Before I stop today's session, let me go into the system and show you that LTR configuration screen once more. Now that you have understanding of what we are talking about, it might. So hopefully everybody can see my screen, the other system. Let me make sure that I have the chat window open. Correct. You can then, in that case, once you have multiple, then you can choose, pick and choose what tables you want to do for replication and what you want to do for scheduled based replication. Now, so if you can see, here is my configuration, right? Can everybody see that there is a mass transfer ID? After the connection was established, a 3-digit number was provided. This is the name of the configuration that ended up being a schema in my HANA system. If I expand it and I expand the table, can you see that there are like 6 or 7 RS tables? These are all the automatic tables that gets created to maintain. If I brought data from a table called, let's say, BSEG, what time did the replication happen? How many records came through at this second? All that information will be maintained in these log tables. There are 3 tables called DD02L, DD02T, and DD08L that gets automatically replicated. Where just by submitting your SLT configuration, these 3 tables gets replicated automatically. You don't have to do anything. And tomorrow, I will talk about the architecture. I will talk about the significance of these 3 tables. And I will take you into the SLT replication. So I'll quickly show you here. And I'll explain this in detail tomorrow. This is how the SLT screen, data provisioning screen, is going to look like in your HANA Studio. I am connected to this particular source system, which is my EHP7 IDES.com, which is nothing but my SAP ECC application. My target system is the HANA system. This system, the DB Connect name is called, the schema is called ECC A HANA Sidecar. And can you see that these tables have been currently replicated? And wherever it says replicate in process, these tables were set for real-time replication. And you will see there are, one second, let me move my, you see there are 5 different options here. We will go through each one of them in detail. Once you know this, you would have understood how to do the replication. What are the different ways you can? So for that, you need to first understand the SLT architecture. Tomorrow, when we start off, we will start with the SLT architecture, understand how data flows from a source through the SLT into the target HANA system. And then we will come here and look at each one of these options. And to make it interesting, to show the real-time capability, I will go into this SAP ECC application. This system, the source system, I will create a table and I will load data entries. I will load 1 or 2 records and save it and immediately switch here and show you that the data has been brought over into the target HANA system through the replication process. All right. So that's what we are going to be talking about tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a very interesting session, the SLT architecture, and then understanding the concept of what these 3 tables does is very, very critical. Fred has a question. What kind of certification? So the typical certification is the application associate. It's called the C underscore HANA IMP. I think the latest one is underscore 17, I believe. That's the certificate that you should be taking. All right. So I will stop here today. Tomorrow we will start with SLT architecture, and we will go into the hands-on of how these different replication techniques are working in the system. How does the load operation work? How does replicate behave? What happens when you do a stop or a suspend replication? And what happens when you do a resume operation? We will look into all these details, and then subsequent class, I will show you how to do transformation. If you're not just replicating, but you want to do a transformation before you land the data in the target system, how would you go about doing the transformation techniques in the system? All right. Excellent. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you for attending the session. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to visit our Vimeo page and follow for more upcoming videos.